7 World Championships, 52 Grand Prix victories, 8 wins at the Isle of Man TT. Phil Reed didn't just race, he conquered. They called him the Prince of Speed, but the paddock knew another name, Rebel Reed. The man who defied team orders, who turned teammates into rivals and rivals into enemies, who never once apologized for any of it. But at 82, when you look back across his career, through decades of interviews, appearances, and stories he told along the way, 5 names keep surfacing. Not friends, not allies, but the men who, in very different ways, shaped the rider and the man he became. A childhood hero who gave him his first chance, a rival whose greatness he could never deny, a teammate he beat and lost forever, a ghost still haunting his greatest triumph, and an old enemy who became the only one who truly understood. A man who never bowed, finally naming the people he did. Before the championships, before the paddock politics, before any of it, there was a boy in Luton with a motorcycle and a dream. Phil Reed was 13 when his mother handed him a matchless 250. She rode a 1922 Rudge herself, every single day. Speed was in the blood. But the name that lit something deeper in that boy was Jeff Duke, 6-time world champion, the most elegant rider of the 1950s, a man who made racing look like art. Most childhood heroes stay on posters. Duke didn't. In 1963, he was building something, the Scuderia Duke Gilera team, a bold attempt to challenge MV Agusta's dominance with resurrected 4-cylinder machines. When rider Derek Minter was seriously injured at Brands Hatch, Duke needed a replacement. He called Phil Reed. Young, unproven at the top level but hungry. Reed answered immediately. That season, he finished 3rd at the senior TT and 2nd at the Dutch TT in Assen, racing against Mike Hailwood on the world's biggest stages. It was the beginning of everything. Many riders admire their heroes from a distance. Very few are pulled onto the stage by the hero himself. Reed never forgot that Jeff Duke didn't just inspire him, he opened the door and told him to walk through. Phil Reed was not built to admire anyone. He raced to win, and if winning meant war, so be it. But there was one man who broke that pattern, not by force, but by sheer, undeniable brilliance. Mike Hailwood, 9 world championships, 37 Premier Class victories, the rider most experts still call the greatest of all time. Reed never hid it. He openly admitted he would have won more titles, more TT races, if Hailwood hadn't existed. From a man who never conceded anything on track, that admission alone tells you everything. But it was their last great encounter that said the most. The 1978 Formula One TT. Hailwood, 38, returning after 12 years away on a Ducati. Reed on the factory Honda. 2 legends chasing each other through the mountain roads of the Isle of Man. Red later recalled, "I heard him coming into Ramsey. We passed and repassed, waving at each other as he went by or I went by. Honda's engine eventually failed. Hailwood won what many call the greatest TT victory ever. Red called it one of the most exciting moments of his life. Not because he won, but because he got to race alongside the only man he ever considered greater than himself. They called him Little Bill, 5'2", barely 100 pounds, the smallest man in the paddock, and one of the fastest who ever lived. In 1967, Bill Ivey won 8 out of 12 races in the 125 cubic centimeter championship, dominating on a machine that could kill him every time the engine seized. Pure talent in the tiniest frame. Yamaha paired them together, and for a while, they were unstoppable. But 1968 changed everything. The factory decided to divide the spoils before a single race was run. Reed would take the 125 cubic centimeter title, Ivy the 250 cubic centimeters. Ivy honored the agreement. Reed did not. After wrapping up the 125 cubic centimeters championship in Brno, he turned around and fought Ivy for the 250 cubic centimeters crown too. They finished the season dead level. Same points, same number of wins. Reed won on aggregate time across the season. The title was his. The trust was gone. Ivy, devastated, announced he was leaving motorcycles for car racing. But to fund the switch, he returned to two wheels on a Jawa 350. At the Sachsenring in 1969, the engine seized during practice. Bill Ivy was 26 years old. There is no verdict here, only this. Of the two men, only Reed lived long enough to carry the weight of that story. Some rivals you beat, some beat you, and some disappear before the question is ever answered. Jarno Saarinen was the third kind. The Finnish engineer arrived in the 1973 season like nothing Grand Prix racing had seen. On Yamaha's new four-cylinder two-stroke, he won the first 4 races across 2 classes, 250 cubic centimeters and 500 cubic centimeters, with a dominance that felt almost clinical. At Paul Ricard, the opening 500 cubic centimeter round, Saarinen crossed the line 16 seconds ahead of Phil Reed. In top-level racing, 16 seconds is not a gap. It is a statement. Reed knew immediately this was not an ordinary rival. This was a rider who made the future visible. Then came Monza, May 20th, 1973. First lap of the 250 cubic centimeter race. A seized engine, a chain reaction of falling machines, and 2 riders, Saarinen and Renzo Pasolini, gone. Yamaha withdrew from the championship. Reed went on to win his first 500 cubic centimeter world title that season. The trophy was real, but the question never left. Could he have beaten Saarinen? Reed never claimed he could. And at 82, perhaps that honesty is the deepest form of admiration, acknowledging a peak you were never given the chance to climb. Every great career needs a nemesis. Phil Reed found his in Giacomo Agostini. 15 World Championships, 122 Grand Prix victories, and an ego that matched Reed's own pound for pound. When MV Agusta paired them in 1973, it was gasoline meeting fire. Agostini had ruled the 500 cubic centimeter class for 7 consecutive years. Reed was brought in as support. He refused the role entirely. While Agostini complained about favoritism, Reed scored points at every opportunity. By season's end, Reed had taken the 500 cubic centimeter crown, Agostini's crown. The Italian left for Yamaha. 2 years later, he took it back. Neither man ever made it easy for the other. But decades have a way of softening what seasons never could. Years later, 2 old men kept meeting at the same historic events, the same classic circuits. Weeks before Reed's death in 2022, they sat together at a Sen. Agostini remembered, "We were talking about things gone past. He was a great rider and very aggressive. It's important to stay friendly, but we may not be gentlemen all the time, especially when you want to win." Old jokes, old scars, and the strange relief of surviving. Agostini was the only man on earth who truly understood what Reed had lived through, because he lived through the same races, the same fears, the same era. To admire your oldest enemy is proof that the war is over, and both soldiers made it home. 5 men, 5 very different kinds of admiration. A mentor who pulled him from obscurity, a rival whose brilliance he could never outrun, a teammate whose trust he broke and whose absence he could never fill, a comet who vanished before the race was decided, and a lifelong enemy who, in the end, became the closest thing to a brother. Together, they don't just tell the story of Phil Reed, they tell the story of what racing does to a man, how it builds him, breaks him, haunts him, and if he's lucky enough to grow old, how it teaches him to look back with something other than pride. Phil Reed at 82 was no longer fast, but he was finally slow enough to see what had always been true, that glory is never a solo ride. For the boy from Luton who never bowed, these 5 names were the road he actually traveled.